Hello. On the Sunday Politics in Wales, we'll tell you about concerns that welfare reforms could result in fewer houses in the private sector being rented to people on benefits. And we'll hear from the Health Minister, Mark Drakeford, as he prepares to announce how the NHS will deal with winter pressures. Well, joining me throughout today's programme, two MPs, the Conservative Jonathan Evans and Labour's Kevin Brennan. Both have been at Remembrance Day services this morning. Kevin Brennan, First Minister Karen Jones there at Cathays Park in central Cardiff. You were there for that service this morning, and coming a year before the 100th anniversary from the beginning of the First World War, what was the mood there?
Well, as ever, it was a sombre mood and a reflective mood, thinking about all those who've sacrificed their lives on our behalf. And I think people are very much aware of how this has, in recent years, I think even grown as an event. Perhaps because we've been involved in more conflicts in recent years than before, but I think there's also an awareness that the big centenary anniversary of the outbreak of the First World War is next year, and there were huge losses here in Wales, as everybody knows.
Jonathan Evans, you were in North Cardiff in your constituency. Many services across the whole country today, aren't there? Yes.
Our service is probably, 3 or 4 miles just north of the national service, but it's very much a community event, the local schools participating, the local youth groups that are allied to the services, and I think on this occasion probably more local groups participating than we can ever remember. I think that the turnout was also very large, something like 500 people, which, bearing in mind that the national event was being held just down the road, quite a lot. And I think that's replicated right the way across Wales, and I endorse what Kevin has said. I think that many people do understand now, because of other conflicts that have been going on around the world, these events are really important and very, very relevant to the current generations.
OK, we'll leave it there for the moment. Now, moving on Tuesday, the Welsh Government will announce how it will deal with the increased pressure that will hit the health service this winter. Several health boards have already announced how they'll cope with extra emergency demands, and ministers have been working with the health boards, ambulance service and social care bodies on their plans for the winter ahead. The Health Minister, Mark Drakeford, joins us from our Cardiff newsroom now. Good afternoon, Minister.
Good afternoon.
Now, you'll be leading a government debate on Tuesday. You're a brave man, aren't you? Because the opposition parties will relish the opportunity to discuss your government's record on the NHS.
Well, I'm very happy to discuss our record. What I will be doing on Tuesday is setting out the plans that we have for this winter, the preparation we have for this winter, and the fact that we will go into this coming winter with performance across the unscheduled care service at a better level than we were this time last year.
Now, I'm sure you'll be aware of comments from the Prime Minister, David Cameron, last week, who alluded to the possibility of a winter crisis in the NHS in Wales. He agrees with you. He doesn't think that there will be a crisis because there's a crisis every day in the NHS in Wales, says the Prime Minister. How do you feel when you hear him making those comments in the Commons?
Well, grounded in ignorance, larded with arrogance, the Prime Minister looks at the Welsh NHS through the wrong end of an old Etonian telescope. So, to be quite honest, my hands are full dealing with what we have in Wales. I think the Prime Minister will be far better off concentrating on the English NHS with some of the real difficulties that we know are faced there, as they are in Scotland, as they are in Northern Ireland. The coming winter will give us all difficult days. What we really ought to be doing is concentrating on those things we can learn from one another to make sure that we all do the very best we can to make sure that patients across the United Kingdom get the service they will need.
And you are happy, are you, having spoken to all the bodies involved, that the Welsh Government is doing as much as it can to ensure that these crises are dealt with?
Well, I think we have a strong national leadership this year. I think we have lots of new activity at local level. There is no way at all that anybody can predict everything that will happen during the winter. The last winter was the longest and coldest since 1963. We will hit some difficult days during this winter too. What we all have to do is make sure that we've done everything we can to prepare for that, to have the plans in place, to have the services in place.
So what have you done then?
Well, we have a new national planning forum. We have £150 million extra going into the Welsh NHS. We have £10 million bringing new nurses onto our wards. We have new arrangements between the ambulance service, between health boards. We have a new level of engagement with our social care partners right across the system. Since March of this year, when last winter was coming to an end, we have been preparing for the winter that we now face.
Now, we know that the opposition parties are very keen to criticise, and they were very critical of a decision of the Health Board in West Wales. There was a suggestion from the opposition parties anyway that operations were being cancelled. The government denies that, but already the potential impact of any winter crisis is seeing its way to the Senedd, isn't it?
Well, local opposition parties quite certainly cannot have it both ways. They can't, on the one hand, criticise the Welsh NHS for not being prepared for winter, and then the minute a health board announces how it is going to respond to difficulties, want to criticise them for that preparation too. So there are steps that local health boards have to take. Sometimes that will mean a new balance between planned surgery and emergency surgery, but there are many other things that local health boards across Wales are doing. We need to support them. We need to support the staff who will be working in our service right through this winter. And the carping and critical attitude that opposition parties bring to the table really is no help to them or to patients.
Now, finally, if I could ask you about Health Inspectorate Wales comments made last week, a suggestion from them, an admission perhaps, that they didn't think that they were in a position to be able to predict or decide whether there were anything on the scale of mid-Staffordshire happening in the Welsh NHS. You told us on this programme that you couldn't be sure that it wasn't. You felt that the NHS in Wales was more robust, but you couldn't be sure that it wasn't. The inspectors say that they can't be sure that it isn't. Who can tell us whether the NHS, anything like this is going on in the NHS?
I think what I've said to you before is that the Welsh NHS is not immune from the pressures that led to the difficulties at Mid-Staffordshire. However, I am confident that there is nothing today going on in the Welsh NHS that is on that scale. And I'm confident of that because HIW, Health Inspection Wales, is just one strand in a much wider pattern of assurance that we have. We have inspections from the Wales Audit Office, from CSSIW, from community health councils in Wales. We have all the things that local health boards themselves do to make sure that their services are safe and sustainable. We have the actions the Welsh Government takes in receiving reports from local health boards. I am confident that today in the Welsh NHS, the conditions that were reported in Mid-Staffordshire are not happening. Do I think this means that we're immune from that? Do I think that we can afford to be relaxed or complacent? Absolutely not. We will go on seeking the assurances that we need so that Welsh patients know that the service they have is a safe one and one that they can rely on.
Mark Drakeford, thanks very much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Well, Jonathan Evans, your response to what you heard then, if you listen to the Health Minister, then Wales is prepared perfectly for the winter ahead.
Well, I think the Minister's lashing out at all of his critics there, isn't he? And let me just say, I don't see it from an old Etonian telescope, as he puts it. I see it from a Lewis School Pengham perspective. And what I see is a situation in which our health service in Wales is underfunded compared with the situation that we have in England. And that's absolutely undeniable. And very many people who are active in this area are saying that there are real cost pressures that arise as a result of that. And the outcomes that we are getting are ones in which targets are being missed on a consistent basis. That's not because people aren't working hard, but because where the failure is that there has not been adequate funding put into the system. Let me just say as well, I rather thought it was complacent to say what was said about mid-staffs. I've got, in my own constituency, 2 very high-profile reports that have been done by the Public Service Ombudsman on health service cases, which I think should have been followed up in more detail by the Health Minister. And lest anybody says again, oh, you know, these are just carping critics, as we just heard again, Anne Clwyd spoke about her late husband's own experience in a hospital in my constituency. I think that the Health Minister should take these concerns seriously and not dismiss all of his critics in the way that he just did.
Kevin Brennan, are you surprised that the Welsh NHS is featuring so prominently during Prime Minister's questions? Because it's not only this week that we've heard David Cameron attack the NHS here.
Well, I'm certainly pleased that we've got Mark Drakeford as our Health Minister and not Jeremy Hunt when we've seen the top-down reorganisation of the NHS that's going on in England with elements of privatisation being introduced. And for David Cameron, it's a deflection, really, from actually addressing the problems that Ed Miliband's raised with him at Prime Minister's questions about the crises that are occurring within the NHS in England as a result of that top-down reorganisation, which, remember, the Conservatives promised wouldn't happen before the last general election. So it's just a distraction, really, from answering the questions, the very real and important questions that Ed Miliband puts to him every week about the NHS in England.
OK, well, let's concentrate on the NHS in Wales then. How reassured are you by what the Minister had to say about the preparedness of the NHS ahead of the winter?
Well, as I said, I can't think of a better person to act as our Health Minister than Mark Drakeford. He's extremely well qualified and he's really on top of his brief and certainly has pulled together, I think, all the elements that are required.
But Jonathan suggests he hasn't got the right tools to do the job, or he hasn't got enough money to do the job properly.
Well, as you know, in the recent budget settlement, more money has been put into the NHS in Wales to acknowledge that there does need to be that investment as well. But I think that Mark getting on the front foot, getting out there in front of the Assembly, making the statement himself, and opening that up to scrutiny, I think is an indication of the approach that he's taking, which is to be positive, open, on the front foot. And he's very much a health minister who understands the health service, understands its values and its ethos, and that it's made up of the people that work in it. And we must make sure that in holding it up to proper scrutiny, we also celebrate the amazing achievements of our NHS.
And that recent increase in funding is in itself a recognition that the initial decision to cut health service funding in Wales is producing these problems. I welcome this, but at the same time, I think that we've got to work together in order to improve the outcomes. And I think that what we just heard from Mark, who I know very well, and I think it's a bit beneath him, just dismissing everyone as carping critics or where they went to public school or what, that's irrelevant. People who are looking for better health outcomes in Wales and ones which at least match what's happening in England, that would be an achievement. For all the criticism, all the criticism
in many areas, Jonathan, as you know,
England's better than Wales.
In many areas, they do match and are better than the health service that's offered there. So I think
Too
you're
rarely.
very selective,
Too
in the
rarely.
examples that you choose.
Do you think perhaps the Minister perhaps could be commended for, you know, coming in front of us, and as he's doing in front of the Assembly as well? Perhaps, though, from an opposition perspective, he's presenting himself as a hostage to fortune, because if there is an enormous crisis, then what he's saying today will be thrown back in his face.
I think that Mark's been open and frank about the challenges facing the NHS at a time when we've had huge cuts across the board as a result of the austerity approach of the government towards the economy. That's led to there being big pressures on the budgets for public services in Wales, and as we know, the NHS is a huge part of that. But I think Mark is being upfront, frank, and I think he should be congratulated for being prepared, you know, to face up to these difficulties and to explain to the public what the problems are and the approach that the Welsh Government is taking to deal with how you deal with this with limited resources.
Well, the resource question, often the Welsh Government here and perhaps Labour politicians suggest that not enough money, the money's been cut by your government.
Well, they'd always say, let's have some more money. The reality, however, is how money gets spent is a choice of government here in Wales. Government here in Wales decided to go and buy Cardiff Airport, then said they don't have enough money to pay for so many other things that happen in Wales. These are all priorities that are set in politics. And I do welcome Mark, who I've known for very many years, coming on this programme, appearing in the Assembly. But you know, he's an Assembly minister. It's his job to be accountable. The only reason we're saying it's a good thing that he does these things is because there are too many other ministers in the Welsh Assembly who walk away from it, who don't think that they need to be accountable at all. At least in Mark's case, I think that he is fronting up, but that's what his job is.
OK, we're out of time. We'll leave it there for the moment. Now, one of the country's biggest private landlords has told this programme that benefit changes could put his business at risk. The UK government says it's making the system more fair, but Carmarthenshire-based Kevin Green fears tenants will fall behind on their rent when a new system of paying benefits is introduced. Our political reporter Daniel Davis spent the day with him.
Kevin Green, a landlord and an entrepreneur, but he's concerned about the knock-on effect of welfare reforms.
What we find is if rent payment is put in the tenant's hand, they've not been taught in school or through further education to run a home, and they just can't budget. And it's going to lead to huge arrears, you know.
He's built a small property empire with more than 700 homes around Carmarthenshire. I spent the morning with him to hear how he thinks the overhaul to the welfare state will change his business.
But because I'm on my own with all the children...
I met one of his tenants, Stacey, a mother of 11 children, 9 of whom live with her in a 4-bedroom house in Llanelli. Her benefits were capped in August. She gets just over £500 a week, but she's behind on the rent.
I can't afford to pay all my bills. I run out of money before I'm due to get my next lot of benefit. Yeah, it's struggling.
We don't know how many people here in Carmarthenshire would have had their benefits capped. Just over 700 people in Wales were affected. But a much bigger change to the welfare system is on its way. Universal Credit will merge 6 benefit payments into 1 monthly payment. Mr Green's worried about the findings of a trial run among housing association and council tenants in Torfaen. There, rent arrears went up.
Because I was homeless myself in 1984, I tend to veer towards helping people who are high priority tenants who have had difficulties. You know, one of the options for me, that's going to have to stop. I pull all those houses out of that provision.
The UK government says it wants to restore fairness to a system that was allowed to spiral out of control. It's working on protection and exemptions for tenants and landlords and says monthly direct payments will make it easier for people to move into work. Years ago, Kevin Green was sleeping rough. Now he teaches other people how to make a fortune. Universal Credit is due to be phased in over 4 years, in a week when MPs have criticised the government's handling of it. This wealth coach says he's not convinced it'll work out.
Well, Kevin Brennan, we've heard many criticisms of this plan from the UK government. One from perhaps a surprising source there.
I find it difficult to have a great deal of sympathy for Mr Green, I must be honest, having built up his property empire and made his fortune in this way. But what I would say is that I do have sympathy with a lot of the people who come to see me in my surgeries and other MPs who need help with their rent, which is what housing benefit is. And some of the changes that the government have been making, like the introduction of the bedroom tax, make no sense. Also, like the, you know...
What about the benefits cap? We heard reference to it there in that piece.
Well, again, that's affecting lots of constituents as well. Now, we said we'd support a cap, but we do need to look at the impact of, that it's having on families and make sure that that's done in such a way that there is proper transitional help, not inadequate transitional help. But also there are other changes, like, for example, paying the rent direct to tenants. Now, I understand the purpose of that. It's to help them to budget and so on, but actually in practice, in reality, what's happening is, well, the bedroom tax, in some cases, people, you know, housing associations are talking about knocking flats down because they can no longer fill them, and in the case of the direct payments, it's resulting in rent arrears growing for people that are vulnerable and need more help not to be put in that sort of position.
Now, you said that you didn't have much sympathy for Mr Green. I'm not sure you have any, do you, Jonathan?
Well, I think we've got to look at Mr Green's business model. He's looked at the fact that government is funding £22 billion in housing benefit, and he would like a situation in which the government cut out the middle person altogether and just send the cheque to him on a regular basis.
He does say that he wants to help people who are perhaps in a sticky situation.
Well, that's all well and good, but at the same time, people who are vulnerable people will be helped by the changes that the government's putting forward. Now, let me just explain what those changes are very quickly. Up until now, we have cut out the middleman. Mr Green gets his cheque, a bulk cheque, 700 properties, goodness knows how big that cheque is, on a regular basis. But the test that was done in Torfaen found 95% of people are perfectly capable of receiving their housing benefit and settling their housing costs on a regular basis without there being increases in arrears. It's true that in 5% of cases, those arrears went up. And what we've got to do is to find a mechanism in which we ensure that the vulnerable people, the 5%, are ones where maybe we do need to do the direct payment route. But for the other 95%, we shouldn't treat these people, frankly, as though, I'm about to say in that clip, as though they're incapable of understanding anything. These people must be treated like proper citizens in our country.
I would welcome a change being made to help vulnerable, because this is the point. That test also showed a big increase in arrears amongst some of the most vulnerable.
5%.
A big increase, about 5%, are there real people, and every one of them are individual cases. Yes. So we know through our surgeries, Jonathan, are people who often struggle to cope and may have a multitude of other issues that they're trying to deal with, including other debts they have to pay, including a family to feed. They may have to go to the local food bank these days in order to get that kind of support.
And they will be exempted by the system.
To be paid, and that is not happening because clearly the Torfaen pilot showed that those rent arrears are going up for the most vulnerable tenants, and we should.
And I think Jonathan reflected that there should be a mechanism to help those.
Well, that's why we did the pilot.
OK, good. We're out of time. Now, time for a quick look back at some of the political stories of the week in 60 seconds. On his first official visit to the National Assembly, Matthew Balzan, the new US ambassador to Britain, said UK membership of the European Union was entirely a matter for the UK government, but the US valued a strong UK in a strong EU. There was no gunpowder, treason and plot at Westminster, as 20 MPs, including Conservative Simon Hart and Labour's Mark Tarmy, took part in a rocket launching competition. They joined engineering apprentices from across the UK, including a group from Broughton's Raytheon factory, which is in Mr Tammy's Allen and Deeside constituency. Conservative Alan Cairns proposed a new law to combat nuisance telephone calls. The Vale of Glamorgan MP wants non-domestic callers to display their telephone numbers. It would also force network operators to provide caller display services for free. And before kick-off at the Wales v South Africa rugby match, the First Minister Carwyn Jones gave the Duke of Cambridge a certificate to mark the planting of a tree for his son Prince George as part of the Welsh Government's plant scheme. Kevin Brennan, Alan Cairns' debate on nuisance calls there. You have had a debate on that, haven't you? A decade ago, which... has it led to what Mr Cairns was talking about this week? Yeah,
actually, I introduced what's called a 10-minute rule bill about 10 years ago, which was intended to try and stop these silence nuisance calls from companies, actually. It's like that old game when we were, you know, some kids used to play, they knock on people's doors and run away. Well, you have companies doing that on the phone, and as a result of the bill I introduced, the fines were hugely increased, and it has led to a reduction, but I'm glad that Alan's taking it on as an issue as well.
Jonathan, you've had a debate last week. Tell us about that.
Well, high point for me was my debate on family annihilation. Those are those terrible cases where you hear invariably of a man killing their entire family before committing suicide. I think that we need to drill down into these cases, understand a lot more about them and change our public policy in order to, as much as we can, reduce the incidence of these terrible, terrible offences.
And from the research that you've done, perhaps the circumstances of those cases in the UK are different to circumstances in other countries?
Absolutely. We've got strong gun laws in the UK, but one marked difference between us, for instance, in the USA and Europe, is that in 80% of these cases in Europe and the United States, the weapon used is a gun. In fact, in the UK, we have fewer of the cases, but guns are used in less than 20% of them. I think that is an argument in favour of retaining and, if necessary, strengthening our gun controls.
Yeah, yeah.
Very good. Now, a very brief answer from you both. The US ambassador was here. He said it's a matter for the UK whether the UK stays in the EU, but America would like them to, I think was what he was suggesting. Do you agree with him?
I do. I'm a strong supporter of the European Union. I think it's good for Britain.
America is discussing with us at the moment a new trade deal. It'll be discussed with Europe. It wouldn't be discussed separately with Britain.
Great. Thank you very much for joining us. We're out of time. Let's go back to Andrew now in London.